The dying man didn't crawl out of the desert. He fell from the sky into the icy, black waters of the Kettle River Gorge. Eleanora Shaw heard the impact from her cabin, a tremendous, wet smash like a felled sequoia, hitting a lake, followed by a silence more profound than any the high Sierra night usually offered. It wasn't a sound that belonged here, not in this remote cathedral of ancient stone and whispering pines, 60 miles from the nearest mining town or railroad spur. She stood frozen, a carved spoon in her hand, the scent of pine sap and venison stew thick in the air. Then, driven by a compulsion she didn't understand, she grabbed her heavy wool coat, a coil of rope, and her Winchester, and stepped out into the brittle cold. The moon was a sliver, casting skeletal shadows. Eleanora, a woman of 30 with a map of past hardships written in the fine lines around her eyes and the set of her stern mouth, moved with a woodsman's quiet grace toward the gorge's roar. She found him not in the river, but on a jagged shelf of rock 20 feet down the cliff face, as if the current had spat him there in contempt. He was broken, a puppet with cut strings. His fine city clothes, a wool suit now shredded, soaked through with blood and river water. But he was alive. His breath came in wet, shallow hitches that plumed in the frigid air. "Don't move," she called down, her voice swallowed by the gorge's echo. He couldn't have moved if he'd tried. It took her an hour, the rope biting into her palms, the granite scraping her boots to haul him up. He was slight, with the soft hands of a clerk or a scholar, a stark contrast to the raw wilderness. Back in her cabin, by the fire's glow, she saw the extent of the damage: compound fractures in both legs, a chest mottled with deep bruises, internal bleeding whispering its promise of doom. He was perhaps 50, with kind, desperate eyes that held intelligence now clouded with pain. "The balloon," he rasped, as she carefully cut away his ruined jacket. "Balloon?" Eleanora muttered, dabbing a wound on his temple. It explained the skyfall. A fool's errand, crossing the Sierras in a silk bag. Gone. Crashed. Upstream. It doesn't matter. His hand, trembling violently, clutched at her wrist. The strength in the grip was shocking, a final surge of will. "Listen, my name is Alistair Finch, Surveyor. For the Central Pacific. They know I have it." "Have what?" Eleanora asked, her voice low. She'd had her fill of men and their secrets. Her solitude here was hard. One dot from inside his vest, against his heart, he pulled not a leather wallet, but a long oilskin pouch sealed with wax. It was dry. He pressed it into her hands. It felt dense, important. The amended surveys. For the Dutch flat route. The real ones. He coughed, a speckle of blood appearing on his lip. The company. They filed fraudulent maps with the government. Shorter, cheaper. They're being paid by the mile, you see. Millions. In bonds. This. He gasped, his eyes begging her to understand. This proves it. The true route, the longer path. It bypasses Shoshone Peak. A cold that had nothing to do with the mountain air settled in Eleanora's bones. Shoshone Peak. Not a peak at all, but the sacred heart of the Tövusi-ü band's summer grounds, a valley they'd held for generations. A place she knew intimately. They'll blast right through the valley if they use their false maps. Finch whispered, his voice fading. The land agents. They'll come to drive the people out, violently. This document. It stops the railroad legally. Forces them to take the North Pass. Saves the valley. His gaze locked onto hers, seeing past her warm flannel and calloused hands to something he needed to trust. You are the woman who lives alone, who trades fairly with the Tövusi-ü, walks their trails. My guide in Sacramento spoke of you. Eleanora Shaw. He knew her name. The revelation was a shock. "You must get this to Thomas Red Cloud. He is a shaman among his people. A man of law, too. He reads English. He'll know what to do. Do not trust the railroad men or the sheriff in Silverton. They are bought." His breath hitched, a terrible, final sound. "Promise me." Eleanora looked at the oilskin pouch, then at the dying man who had fallen from heaven with a burden meant for a giant. Her past was a locked chest full of regrets, her present a chosen exile. This was a door swinging open onto a storm. But she saw the valley in her mind's eye, the high meadows of paintbrush and lupin, the quiet deer, the ancient petroglyphs, the face of a Tövusi-ü umlaut woman who had once given her medicine for a fever. "I promise," she said. The words solid and heavy as river stones. Alistair Finch gave a shallow nod, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Thank you." He closed his eyes. His breathing grew slow, then silent just before dawn. Eleanora sat vigil until the first gray light bleached the stars. She wrapped the oilskin in a square of deerskin and hid it inside the hollowed leg of her cast-iron stove. Then she buried Alistair Finch on a sun-dappled knoll overlooking the gorge, marking the spot with a cairn of stones. She said no words. The deed was the prayer. She spent the day in a state of heightened alert, every crack of a branch a potential threat. Finch had said they knew he had it. Who would come? Company thugs? Bounty hunters? She had to get the document to Thomas Red Cloud. His winter camp was a 3-day ride east. Over the high pass dot as the second sunset since Finch's death painted the sky in hues of fire and ash, Eleanora made her decision. She would leave at first light. She banked the fire, her nerves taut as bowstrings. Exhaustion finally pulled her into a fitful sleep in her cot by the window. She awoke to the soft, pre-dawn glow of the third morning. And a presence. Silhouetted against the pale light in her open doorway was a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, not standing like a threat, but with a stillness that was part of the landscape itself. He wore a mix of buckskin and warm wool, his long black hair streaked with silver. His face was lined with wisdom and weather, and his eyes held the deep, knowing calm of still water. In his hand was a staff of juniper wood, topped with a bundle of eagle feathers and abalone shell. He did not speak. He simply looked at her, then his gaze traveled to the now cold fireplace, to the disturbed earth near the table where Finch had died, and finally back to her. The air in the cabin changed, growing charged, respectful, ancient. Eleanora's heart hammered against her ribs. She sat up slowly, her hand not reaching for the rifle under her cot, but resting on the deerskin-wrapped package she had kept beside her all night. The man, Thomas Red Cloud, finally spoke, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder in the mountains. The river spirit spoke of a falling star. The wind carried the scent of iron and fear to my fire. He stepped inside, his moccasins silent on the plank floor. His eyes held hers. A dying man passed from this place. He carried a truth. Now you carry it. He had not been summoned. He had simply known. Eleanora, her throat tight, held out the deerskin package. He said to give this to you. His name was Alistair Finch. He said it would save the valley. Thomas Red Cloud took the package, his fingers brushing hers. A spark, not of electricity, but of understanding, passed between them. He did not open it. He simply nodded, as if confirming a story he already knew. The men who seek this truth are already in the canyon below, he said, his eyes grave. They follow the trail of the broken skyship. They will be here by midday. The danger was no longer a specter. It had crested the ridge. The shaman's words hung in the cabin's chilled air, more tangible than the wood smoke. Eleanora didn't doubt him. The wilderness had its own telegraph, carried on raven's wings and whispered through pine needles. "How many?" she asked, already moving. She pulled on her boots, her movements efficient, fear channeled into action. 4, on horses. One leads a pack mule. Thomas's eyes scanned her small home, assessing, planning. They are not woodsmen. They are loud, and their metal smells of coal smoke and greed. But their guns are new. Company men. Brutality with a veneer of legality. Eleanora threw essentials into a saddlebag. Ammunition, jerky, a flask of water, her knife. The oilskin document was now in Thomas's possession, a shifting of the burden that felt both relieving and terrifying. "We cannot outrun them to your people's camp," she stated, thinking aloud. "They'll cut us off if we take the high pass. The river gorge is a trap." Thomas watched her, a flicker of approval in his deep-set eyes. "We will not run to the camp. We will lead them to Tövusi-ü, the listening caves." Eleanora knew of them, a labyrinth of granite fissures and caverns high in the palisades above the gorge, a place the Tövusi-ü umlaut used for vision quests. It was treacherous, easy to get lost, easy to die. "You have a plan for the caves," she said, not a question. "The land has a plan," he corrected softly. "We will be its instruments. Come, we must be a ghost before the sun finds the valley floor." They left the cabin as the first golden light speared through the firs. Eleanora didn't look back. Her mare, Juniper, and Thomas's sturdy pinto were saddled quickly. Instead of heading east toward the pass, Thomas led them north, along a game trail that skirted the rim of the Kettle River Gorge. The roar of the water was a constant companion. After an hour of hard riding, Thomas reined in at a place where the trail seemed to vanish into a sheer wall of lichen-covered rock. He dismounted and, with a strength that belied his age, pushed aside a curtain of tough, thorny gooseberry bushes. Behind it was a narrow crack in the cliff face, invisible from 3 feet away. "The back door," he said. They led the horses through the tight, twisting passage for 100 yards, emerging into a hidden, sun-dappled canyon within the canyon. A spring bubbled from the rocks, feeding a small, clear pool. Ferns and moss clung to the walls. It was a sanctuary. "Leave the horses here. They have water, grass. They will be safe." Thomas began to unstrap his saddlebags. "You knew about this place," Eleanora murmured, helping him. "I know the shape of my grandmother's face," he replied. "This land is the same." They cached their saddles and most of their gear, taking only weapons, a little food, and the document. Thomas then led her on foot up a near-vertical scramble, using handholds worn smooth by time and unknown hands. They emerged onto a windswept ledge high above the hidden canyon. Before them, the main face of the palisade was pockmarked with dark cave mouths, like the sightless eyes of a skull. Tövusi-ü. From their perch, they had a panoramic view of the approach to her cabin. As the sun climbed, they saw them. 4 riders, moving with the clumsy aggression of urban men in a wild place. Even from this distance, Eleanora could see the glint of rifle barrels. They dismounted at her cabin, kicked in the door when no one answered. After a short while, they remounted. One man, tall and wearing a city derby hat, pointed directly at the almost invisible game trail she and Thomas had used. He had a tracker with him, a lean wolfish man who moved with a predator's grace, studying the ground. "The tall one in the hat is Silas Rourke," Thomas said quietly, his eyes sharp. "He is a problem solver for the railroad. I saw him last autumn, buying bad whiskey in Silverton and talking of land rights." Rourke and his men began to follow their trail. The chase was on, but it was a chase Thomas had initiated. He led Eleanora into the mouth of the largest cave. The temperature dropped instantly. The world of light and wind was replaced by a profound, dripping silence, broken only by the distant plink of water. The air smelled of damp stone and age. Thomas moved without hesitation, his hand occasionally brushing the wall as if reading a text. They navigated through caverns where stalactites dripped like stone teeth, over underground streams that chuckled in the blackness, through narrow squeezes that tested Eleanora's courage. They did not try to hide their passage. After what felt like miles in the dark, they came to a place where 3 tunnel openings diverged. Here, Thomas stopped. He built a small, almost smokeless fire of dry, old roots in a natural stone hollow, using it to light a pitch pine torch. The flickering light revealed pictographs on the wall spirals, handprints, figures of men and animals, centuries old. "This is a place of stories," Thomas said. He took the oilskin pouch from his shirt. "Our story must join them, for a time." He walked to the left-hand tunnel, felt along the wall about 7 feet up, and pulled aside a loose, flat stone, revealing a deep, dry niche. He placed the pouch inside and resealed it. The stone forgets what it holds. Only the land remembers. Then he did something Eleanora didn't expect. From his own pouch, he took a small folded piece of parchment, a ledger page. It looked like, and sealed it inside a similar oilskin pouch he produced. He walked to the right-hand tunnel and, in a more obvious crevice at eye level, wedged this decoy package firmly into the crack. "A false trail for a false map," he said, a grim smile touching his lips. They extinguished the torch and retreated back the way they came, but only part way. Thomas guided them into a side passage so narrow they had to crawl. It opened onto a high, hidden ledge overlooking the 3-way chamber. They settled in the absolute dark behind a natural parapet of rock to wait. It wasn't long. The sound of clumsy boots, echoing voices, and the harsh glare of bullseye lanterns polluted the sacred silence. "Spread out. Check those openings." It was Rourke's voice, sharp with impatience. Eleanora held her breath. She could see them below, 4 men reduced to dancing pools of light and looming shadows. The tracker, a thin man with a hatchet face, examined the ground near the decoy tunnel. "Sign here," he grunted. "Recent." Rourke strode over. With a grunt of triumph, he yanked the decoy package from the crevice. He tore it open in the lantern light. Eleanora watched his face transform from victory to bewildered fury as he read the ledger page. It was a list of supply costs for a survey team: flour, nails, coffee, utterly meaningless. "What is this?" he snarled. "A goddamn joke?" "It's a diversion," the tracker said, his voice cold. He was looking around, his lantern beam sweeping the walls, passing just below their hiding place. "They wanted us to find this. The real one's still here. Or they took it out another way." Rourke crumpled the false document. "Fan out. Search every crack. And someone watch that entrance." The men began a more violent, thorough search, prying at rocks, shining lights into every hole. The sacred silence was now full of their curses and the scrape of metal on stone. Eleanora watched, her heart a cold drum in her chest. Thomas lay perfectly still beside her, his eyes closed as if in meditation, or as if listening to something far deeper than the clatter below. The tracker's light lingered on the ancient pictographs near the real hiding place. His eyes, sharp and greedy, scanned the symbols. Then they stopped. He took a step closer to the left-hand tunnel, to the very stone that concealed the truth. The tracker's lantern beam painted a yellow circle on the wall where the real document was hidden. Eleanora's muscles coiled, her hand tightening on the Winchester laid across her knees. One shot from here would drop him, but it would seal them in this stone labyrinth with 3 other armed and desperate men. Thomas's hand, gentle but firm, came to rest on her forearm. He didn't open his eyes. He shook his head once, a barely perceptible movement in the dark. "Wait below." The tracker, a man named Cutter, reached out. But he didn't touch the loose stone. His fingers traced the ancient pictograph next to it, a spiral within a circle, with lines radiating outward like sunbeams. He grunted, a sound of superstitious disdain. "Just more Indian scratchings," he muttered, turning his attention to a lower, more promising-looking crack. Eleanora allowed herself a shallow breath. Thomas's faith in the land's plan had held. The decoy had done its work, poisoning the well of their search with suspicion. Nothing would seem obvious now. For another hour, Rourke and his men ransacked the chamber. They found nothing. Frustration boiled over. "They're not here," one of the men, a bulky fellow with a thick beard, complained. "This is a wild goose chase in the dark. They could be halfway to Nevada by now." "Finch gave the maps to someone," Rourke hissed, his voice echoing. "The old man at the trading post said a woman lived alone up here. A stubborn bitch who consorts with the natives. She's got it. Or she gave it to the savage." He kicked a small stalagmite, snapping it off at the base. The act of vandalism in the timeless space felt like a physical blow to Eleanora. "Cutter, can you pick up their trail out of here?" The tracker swept his light across the floor again. "Too much rock. Could be any of 3 tunnels leading out, including the one we came in." Rourke made a decision, his face ugly in the lantern light. "We go back to her cabin. We wait. She come back for her things. Or the Indian will come to her. We'll set an ambush. And this time," he said, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper, "we won't ask polite questions." The men, relieved to be leaving the oppressive caves, gathered their gear and retraced their steps, their lights and voices fading into the depths of the entrance tunnel. Silence, profound and healing, seeped back into the chamber. Eleanora and Thomas waited a full 30 minutes in the dark, listening to the drip of water reclaim its domain. They will be waiting. Eleanora finally whispered, the sound feeling too loud. Thomas nodded. "They are hunters who think the deer returns to the same bed. We will not." He moved, his joints cracking softly after the long stillness. "Come, there is another way." He led her not back toward the entrance, but deeper into the left-hand tunnel, past the hidden niche holding the document. They retrieved the precious oilskin pouch, and then journeyed farther into the mountain's belly than Eleanora thought possible. They navigated by touch and by Thomas's unerring memory, through passages that sometimes required them to wade in icy, chest-high water and over silent, bottomless pits bridged by fallen stone. This was not a path for pursuit. Just as Eleanora's sense of time and direction began to unravel, she saw a pinprick of daylight ahead. It grew into a fissure, screened by a waterfall that cascaded down the outer cliff face. They emerged behind the curtain of water into the blinding afternoon sun and the roar of the falls. On a ledge partway down a completely different side of the Palisades, miles from the hidden canyon where they'd left the horses, and farther still from her cabin, they were drenched, exhausted, but free. The air tasted of pine and freedom. "We loop around to the horses," Thomas said, his face turned to the sun. "Then we ride for the winter camp. The document must be copied and messengers sent to the government man in Sacramento. The truth must speak from many mouths before Rourke can silence it." Their circuitous route took the rest of the day. They found Juniper and the Pinto safe and rested in the hidden canyon. That night, they camped without a fire, deep in a thicket of lodgepole pine, eating cold jerky. The events in the cave hung between them a shared trial. "Why did you come?" Eleanora asked quietly, watching the stars appear between the pine boughs. "Finch said to bring the document to you, but you were already coming." Thomas poked at the ground with a stick. 2 nights ago, the dream came. A bird of metal, falling in fire, and a piece of paper that bled into the river, poisoning the fish. When I awoke, my daughter, who has never left this valley, spoke in her sleep. She said a name, Finch, he looked at Eleanora. The land speaks. I listen. It told me a keeper of a secret was dying near the gorge. I came to bear witness and to carry the word if needed. I found you had already shouldered the burden. I promised a dying man, she said simply. Promises are the roots of great trees, he replied. They hold the earth together. They rode at first light, pushing hard for the Tövusi-ü winter camp in the sheltered eastern foothills. They saw no sign of Rourke. Eleanora began to hope they had slipped the knot. They were 2 miles from the camp, descending a rocky slope into a wide meadow. When the shot rang out, it was a high-powered rifle crack from the tree line across the meadow. Dirt kicked up a foot to the right of Thomas's pinto. The horses shied violently. Ambush! Eleanora yelled, driving Juniper into a gallop toward a cluster of boulders at the meadow's edge. More shots followed, snapping through the air. Rourke hadn't waited at her cabin. He'd guessed their ultimate destination. Cutter had likely found some sign and cut across country to head them off. They reached the boulders, diving from their saddles as bullets whined off the granite. They were pinned down. The camp was so close, yet impossibly far across that open bullet-swept meadow. There! In the rocks, 1 o'clock. Eleanora pointed to a flicker of movement about 200 yards away. She levered around into her Winchester, rested the barrel on the rock, and fired. The shot was answered by a volley from at least 3 positions. Rourke had his whole team. Thomas, crouched beside her, wasn't returning fire. He had the oilskin document out. He was looking from it to the sun, to the distant tree line, his face a mask of fierce calculation. They are between us and my people, he said. We cannot fight through. The document must not fall. What choice do we have? Eleanora asked, firing another covering shot. Thomas met her eyes. You must take it. I will be the rabbit who flushes the wolf. Before she could protest, he let out a piercing, ululating cry, a war cry that echoed across the meadow. Then, to her horror, he sprang onto his pinto, kicked it into a gallop, and broke from the cover of the boulders, riding not toward the camp, but diagonally across the meadow, away from her, presenting a perfect, desperate target. Thomas, no! She screamed out. Every rifle across the meadow turned on him. Gunfire erupted. He was riding low, making for a distant gully, drawing all their fire, all their attention. It was the most courageous, terrible thing Eleanora had ever witnessed. And it was her chance. With the ambushers focused on the shaman, she mounted Juniper, clutched the oilskin pouch to her chest, and burst from the rocks. Riding like hell itself was at her heels, straight for the Tövusi-ü camp. She heard shouts of confusion behind her, a few wild shots that went wide. She didn't look back. She couldn't bear to see Thomas fall. Tears blurred her vision as she rode into the circle of hide lodges, scattering dogs and children, her voice raw as she shouted, Thomas Red Cloud. He's under fire. Meadow to the west. Help him. Armed men materialized instantly, melting from the lodges and the woods. They were on their horses in moments, a silent, deadly wave flowing past her toward the sound of the guns. A strong, older woman with Thomas's eyes took Juniper's reins and helped a shaking Eleanora down. You are the one from the gorge, the woman said, not unkindly. You have brought the storm. And you have brought the truth? Her eyes went to the pouch in Eleanora's white-knuckled hand. Eleanora could only nod, her body trembling with adrenaline and grief, her ears straining for the sound of a single, final shot that would mean she had traded a shaman's life for a piece of paper. The wait in the Tövusi-ü camp was an eternity compressed into heartbeats. Eleanora sat by a central fire, the oilskin pouch a lead weight in her lap. The older woman, Weah, Thomas's sister, brought her bitter tea and a blanket. Saying nothing, her own face a cliff of stoic worry. The sounds of distant gunfire had ceased, replaced by a silence more agonizing. Then, hoofbeats. A single rider emerged from the tree line at the meadow's edge, leading a second horse with a body draped over its saddle. Eleanora's breath caught, but as they drew closer, she saw the rider was one of Thomas's men, and the body on the lead horse was not in buckskin, but in a city-made wool coat. Silas Rourke. Behind them came the rest of the war party, riding slowly, solemnly. And in their midst, walking beside his pinto, one arm held tightly across his torso, was Thomas Red Cloud. He was alive, though a dark stain spread across the shoulder of his buckskin shirt. A cry, part sob, part laugh, escaped Eleanora's throat. She stood, her legs unsteady. The party entered the camp. 2 other bodies were laid beside Rourke's, the bearded man and the other rifleman. Cutter, the tracker, was not among them. He had fled. Thomas's people surrounded him, seeing to his wound a rifle bullet that had passed clean through the meat of his shoulder. He bore the pain in silence, his eyes finding Eleanora across the fire. He gave a small, weary nod. When he was bandaged and seated, a pipe was lit and passed. Only then did Eleanora approach, holding out the oilskin pouch. "The document," she said, her voice thick. He took it, but then placed his hand over hers. "You crossed the killing ground. You delivered it. The promise is kept. You drew their fire. I thought—" "A rabbit knows many tricks," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "I rode for the gully they could not see. It was deep. Their bullets passed overhead. They were poor shots, angry, distracted. When they closed in to finish what they thought was a wounded man, my sons," he gestured to the warriors around him, "were already upon them." One of the younger men spoke up, his voice hard with satisfaction. "Rourke died shouting about his railroad. The other 2 threw down their guns. The wolf man ran into the woods. We let him go. He carries the story of his failure back to his masters. It is a better weapon than a bullet. The immediate danger was over, but the larger battle remained." That evening, in Thomas's lodge, by the light of a seal oil lamp, the document was unsealed. Eleanora watched as Thomas, his face a mask of intense concentration, read Alastair Finch's meticulous surveys, the annotations, the damning evidence of the shortened, fraudulent route. She saw his jaw tighten as he traced the proposed line that would have plowed through the heart of the valley, through burial grounds, through the summer fishing streams. "It is as Finch said," Thomas confirmed. "The law is here, on paper. But paper is weak. It must be made strong by many hands." A plan was forged. 2 of the fastest riders, who knew the back trails to Sacramento, would leave at dawn with a copy of the document sewn into their moccasin solace. They would seek out the federal surveyor general, a man known to be stubbornly honest. Thomas himself, once he could travel, would take the original to the Indian agent at Fort Independence, a man sympathetic to their cause, who could apply official pressure. "And you, Eleanora Shaw?" Thomas asked, looking at her across the fire. "The storm you carried has reached its shore. You are free to return to your gorge." She thought of her quiet cabin, the solitude she had cherished. She thought of the broken balloon, the dying man's trust, the thunder of guns in the meadow, the solidarity of this camp. Her old life felt like a faded sketch. Here was a drawing in bold, vivid colors. "The railroad men know my name and my face," she said slowly. "If I go back, I will be looking over my shoulder forever." And she met his gaze. A promise was a root. "It has grown. I would see this tree stand." Weah smiled. Thomas nodded, understanding. Eleanora stayed. Over the next weeks, as winter tightened its grip, she made herself useful helping with food preparation. tending to Thomas's healing shoulder, learning snippets of the Tövusi-ü umlaut language. She was an oddity, but her courage in delivering the document and her respect for their ways earned her a tentative place. The writers returned from Sacramento with news. The Surveyor General, outraged by the evidence, had launched an immediate investigation, freezing the railroad's bond payments for the Dutch Flat route. A scandal was brewing in the newspapers back east. Thomas's journey to Fort Independence was equally successful. The agent, wielding the original signed surveys, filed a formal injunction on behalf of the Tövusi-ü umlaut band. Citing broken treaties and fraudulent land seizures, the combined legal pressure was a vice the railroad could not withstand. By spring, news filtered up into the mountains, the Central Pacific. To avoid a catastrophic loss of government funding and public credibility, had publicly revised its plans. The main line would indeed divert to the longer North Pass. Shoshone Peak Valley was safe. The victory was celebrated in the camp with a feast. There was singing, drumming, the smell of roasting venison and bitterroot. Eleanora sat at the edge of the firelight, watching. She felt a peace deeper than any solitude had offered. Thomas came to sit beside her. His shoulder healed, though he would always carry the scar. "You are leaving," he said, not a question. "My cabin is still there," she said. "But I am not the same woman who lived in it." "No," he agreed. "You are a woman who carries the trust of the dead and the living. That is a heavy thing, but a good thing." He handed her a small deerskin-wrapped bundle. "For your journey back." The next morning, she packed her few belongings. The entire camp came to see her off. Wea embraced her. The warriors nodded their respect. Thomas stood before Juniper. "The land remembers you now, Eleanora Shaw," he said. "You are in its story. Your door here is always open." "And mine at the gorge," she replied. "If you ever need—" Quiet. She rode west, back toward the Kettle River. The world was greening with spring. When she reached her cabin, she found it untouched, waiting. But it no longer felt like a fortress of isolation. It felt like a way station between two worlds. Inside, she opened Thomas's gift. It was a beautifully crafted knife, its handle of polished elk antler inlaid with abalone shell, the blade of fine, traded steel. Wrapped with it was a small square of birch bark. On it, in Thomas's careful hand, was written not in English, but in the pictographs of his people, a falling star, a woman on a horse, a spiral within a circle, the symbol from the cave wall, and finally, a valley with a strong, straight tree growing in its center. She understood. It was her story. She placed the birch bark square on her mantle, next to the spoon she had been carving the night Alistair Finch fell from the sky. Weeks later, a rider came, a young Tövusi-ü umlaut man she recognized. He brought news from Thomas. The railroad crews had begun work on the North Pass. Cutter had been found dead in a Silverton alley, a victim of a drunken knife fight. The company had moved on. The rider also brought an invitation, a gathering for the summer solstice in Shoshone Peak Valley. Eleanora smiled. She packed a fresh shirt, her new knife, and a pouch of coffee to share. She locked her cabin door, knowing she would return, but also knowing it was no longer her whole world. As she rode east with the young man, the sun warm on her back, she thought of the dying surveyor, the shaman who met her at dawn, the caves, the gunsmoke, and the quiet strength of the people in the valley. The document had been delivered. The valley was saved. And she, the woman from the gorge, had found not just an end to a dangerous task, but a beginning to something she had never known she needed, a place and a people to belong to.